I was afraid of losing my children if I spoke the truth back then. I speak it now because people need to understand, where are we in society? Who are we? Not allowing our past to define us, not acting and behaving according to the labels that people assign us. It's about rising above. And if we don't have mentors that teaches us how to rise above, we stay stuck. Welcome to Coach Soul, the podcast where we explore therapeutic ways to the best versions of ourselves. I'm your host, Steve Hudgins. I'm a licensed professional counselor dedicated to helping you navigate life's challenges. In each uplifting episode, we'll discuss mental health, relationships, self-care, emotional well-being, and personal growth. Join me and with my co-host, Kenya Evelyn, a therapeutic life coach, where sometimes we'll even welcome special guests to our show that share their experience and expertise. So let's embark on this transformative path together and discover a healthier and happier you. Welcome back to Coach Soul, Kenya. It is a pleasure again, always is. Fall is here.
Yes.
And, you know, back in August in Oklahoma, 70 degrees is like winter when we have 100 and something degree temperature. But I love fall because when I could go down into either some of the mountain ranges here next to Tulsa, because we're near Arkansas. I mean, I love going down what's called a Talamina Drive because I call it God's Mosaic fall blanket because there's so many different colors of the trees. And it's they haven't started turning yet, but I hear they're going to start turning soon. And I love blankets that just pop with color. What do you think?
What I'm thinking is there's always one or two that pops before or later. I see over here in Nashville, I have one in my street that is always the first one. I'm like, you just know your timing. This is so wonderful. Fall is definitely my favorite part of the year for so many reasons. But today, Steve, dear listeners, we're not here to talk about nature, but to talk about the nature of the book that you have been working on day and night for a few years in your thesis to get your doctor. And now, in my opinion, and I know I'm biased because I love you and I think you're brilliant and all the things, but it's a gift to the world. So with your permission, my opening question is, how does it even come about? The word, the title of the book, was it the first title that came out of you as an insight, as an inspiration, as a download, or did you play with different names until how did you know that that's what you want to write about?
The book is out. It was released last week. I'm excited that it's out. And during my research, when I was doing interviews with people to get their story, I like hermeneutical. I enjoy the phenomenological. I know these are big, huge words, but it's being able to interpret people's stories as a collective. And that's where it came to mind. You have different individuals that still portrayed the same picture of hurt. And that's when I got the name of blended family. I'm like, nope, that doesn't work. That's like throwing everything in a blender. There's no boundaries. It's all mixed up. You can't pull out, the blueberry from the spinach if you drink it that way. I don't know. It's a blender of a mix, sure. Right? And so Mosaic just seemed to fit well. And piece by piece, I'm piecing stories together. My experience, meaning that I went through it as well, multiple times. And when you think about divorce and remarriage, you're leaving a piece here. And so when I think about blended does not do it justice. Step family doesn't do it justice. I know Europe uses bonus family, and the only type of bonus I think is just Christmas. All the more stuff that you get, right?
But it feels more positive, right, Steve? Like a bonus round, bonus point. It feels like
second chance, yes.
It's extra. It feels more positive. I'm going to agree with you that blended family, it feels sort of icky. Like, I'm not sure if I want to blend everything. I like blend, but I like to blend. And it feels like there's no choice. That's how it feels to me. So tell me more about that.
When you think about piecing stories together, and there has this golden thread theme through everything. Mosaic shards, you think of a family, a nuclear family gets broken.
Yes.
This cup shatters. layers. Well, in Japan, they use gold to put the pieces back together to create a better, beautiful, art. Yes. And to me, family is art. And when I would ask my other therapists, do you treat blended as a normal family? Yeah. And I'm like, we can't. It's individualizing pieces that come together and is trying to understand, the beauty of a mosaic.
Beautiful. So, Steve, I know a little bit of your story. So let's start from the beginning. How does your journey, your own personal story, your journey of brokenness, if you will, healing and faith, and whatever order you feel that comes natural to you, inspire you, shaped the insights of this book? Because I'm very aware that you were so beautifully deep in your research, but you're also very vulnerable and very open to the places you have been. So tell us more about that.
I grew up in a military home. Dad was Air Force security policeman. He trained guard dogs. He guarded B-52 bombers. He was overseeing missile silos in South Dakota. Those are the variety of different things. And growing up in a conservative church, my dad was a country boy. My mom was a city gal. And that's like oil and vinegar, putting those two together. But they celebrated 60 years in August. I'm shocked. My dad had turned 84 3 days prior to their 60th wedding anniversary. And he was probably the longest living Hudgins that I know of in looking back into our lineage. But when you're growing up in that generational, we hear that we get into arguments, we get in the car. Okay, everybody, what went in the home stays in the home. We're going to church. Everybody put a happy face on.
Yes.
Hide the shame, hide your emotions, and
hide the truth.
Hide the truth. Exactly.
Hide the truth.
In part of my book, I talk about hiding the truth. There was a time that my mom was beating me with a switch, and I was moving and hit my head on the nightstand. And I thought at age of 14 that I was losing my brain because of the yuckiness that was coming out. It was brown, it was red, and so it was gushing. And so it took me to the hospital. Now, I was able to check out my military records, and I kept them before I turned 18 because Dad says military loses records. Keep them so you have a history of your stuff. So I'm looking back as I'm writing my book because I want to get a timeline down. And oh my gosh, here's that event that shows up in the paper. And the doc asked her, how did this happen? And my mom said he was reaching for something on his nightstand, slipped and hit his head.
Flat out lie.
And I'm like, should we hide things like this in our past? Do we own it? And so that's just part of the story I wrote in my book. But there's a golden thread that I put in there of how I develop an anxious attachment style. I don't want to give too much away because I want you to read the book, of course.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I look through the lens of attachment. We all look through the lens of attachment.
100%.
And oftentimes I can look at my attachment. Am I looking at a broken or a redeemable lens?
Value or unvaluable?
Exactly. And so when I got into becoming a therapist, going back to school and learning the variety of attachment styles, personality disorders, the divorce from the kid's mother really impacted me. That moved me to get equal access laws changed in 2001, that I was able to get custody of my children. And so a lot of this is what moved me into becoming a therapist and understanding to be vulnerable, because oftentimes what I hear is people are ashamed of their past.
Yeah.
And I often tell my clients, and I remind myself, sit in the emotion that you have, process the emotion, but don't get stuck in the emotion.
There we go.
It's about moving forward.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is, well, we talk so much in this podcast about emotion being the description of energy in motion. If the energy doesn't move, then it actually hardens.
Right.
And because we have the need to just be right. So we feel in a subconscious level, and sometimes conscious, then we start attracting more of the same stuck energy. And I believe that happens with all of us. 100%. And thank you for being so generous in the book, because you go in detail how that happened to you, and you kept choosing the same styles of attachment, and you just kept recreating that story until you didn't.
It's easy to go into a clinical mindset. And that's one thing I made sure to do, is not go into clinical jargon, so to speak, right, as a textbook, but more of a book that people can resonate, can identify. And when you think about telling our story, we don't tell stories as often as we should. I even put in the book, okay, Steve, why now? Why are you speaking up now and sharing your story? Why not back then? With an anxious attachment style, there's fear.
That's right.
I was afraid of losing my children if I spoke the truth back then. I speak it now because people need to understand, where are we in society? Who are we? Not allowing our past to define us, not acting and behaving according to the labels that people assign us. It's about rising above. And if we don't have mentors that teaches us how to rise above, we stay stuck. And the book is to help the reader to identify, hey, this is a real human being. Here's a collective that I put in my research, people who are my clients and the research participants. Some of their key phrases, quotes are in the book to help tie this together, to help us to understand this is where we've been, this is where we are, and how we can be moving forward. There is healing.
100%.
As a faith-based person, I read in the book of James, it says to confess your sins one to another. And that's where that perception came out, was the fact that being able to look at that and say, wait a minute, sin is a God term. It's a judgmental term. But what if I change that, right, to confess our humanity?
Yeah.
This way, we're not one-upping, triumphing, or feeling guilt and shame about what we're discussing. Yeah. It's about being able to talk about, this is my story.
That's right.
And what matters the most is, can people change? Sure. I'm living proof. I went from an anxious style to a secure style. So that's part of the reason why Mosaic piece by piece was written.
I love that. What role do metaphors like mosaic itself and grout and coffee play in making this complex family system really relatable?
I like to think, when I was a kid, I would read the Little House on the Prairie books. And just her description helped me to visualize a prairie, helped me to visualize. And I remember, it's funny because we were living in San Antonio, Texas, where I call hell hot. And we moved to South Dakota, where it's hell freezes over. And that's where Laura Ingalls is from. I still today remember a vivid dream that I had when I was a kid. Coyotes playing in a wheat field. And I was watching, sort of like, I think that's when the movie came out with Dancing with the Wolves type thing. But when you think about metaphors, don't think about a white polar bear. Now, what did you just do? You thought about a white polar bear.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So for trying to give visuality, because you can't draw it on a blackboard on a book. I mean, you can put illustrations, but mosaic, grout, blended has no boundary. But when you say mosaic, it's a lot of shards of pieces of whatever you want to put together. There's grout that binds those pieces together. And so I like mosaic because the grout defines the boundary within the individual, but collectively and individually, light can shine through a mosaic. And I use the coffee term of, just coffee, because what does a coffee bean do? I know we all heard the story. What does an egg and a carrot and a coffee bean have in common when it's in the hot water, right? And the carrot and the egg changes, but it's the coffee bean that does what? It changes the water. It doesn't change itself. And so it's learning, what way can I add flavor to life? And that's what I kind of ingrain in the book, that our stories, doesn't matter who we are, has a way of impacting people. And sometimes people can be impacted by change. Yeah. And as my dad always said, if you look for the negative, you're going to find all the negative you want. If you look for a thread of positive, you're going to see positive things. I'm not saying being Pollyannish and don't think that there's anything negative, but if we allow to hold space for that person and stop being to where, you're prejudiced, you're white privileged, you're this, you're that, you're a narcissist because you said this. Our nation has become divided because we don't want to hear. And we think we're right about our opinion. And so in this book, it's a collective of opinions that creates a mosaic viewpoint of families.
I love this so much, Steve. And dear listeners, as you can feel, this is a different conversation today, and I will continue to interview you because I'm so excited. I want everybody that is listening to tune in, grab the book, read, perhaps in order, perhaps however way the Holy Spirit guides you. There is, in every page, there's a gift for you, and I fully believe that. And my next question for you, Steve, how do you hope that this book will impact, transform, change the conversation, the relationship between parents and healing and children, and just the expansion of humanity and the institution that we call family?
I don't know if it's a hope or a dream or just believing the impact is already there.
That's right.
Because I say that because those who I interviewed, I knew there was an impact. They found their own healing in themselves while I'm just doing interview questions. And I believe there needs to be a shift and change of how we look at families, because right now we have more cohabitation than we do married people and throughout history.
So
What ways can we preserve family? I mean, Kenya, in October, you're going to celebrate 20 years of marriage, and you've had your ups, you've had your downs, but at the same time,
I'm in the journey.
right. It's not the destination, it's the journey that we're in. And if the main goal is to help shift the thinking of ways that we can preserve family instead of individualizing, it takes a community to help thrive with each other. We rely on each other. I mean, off mic, you were giving me some inspiration. If we don't have a sense of family or community, how are we going to thrive individually on our own, alone, our nose in technology?
We won't. We will fade, just like we see. I see when my children spend a lot of time in technology, their eyes just kind of glaze off. We just glaze off from connection and from our heart center altogether. So once again, Steve, in you creating this book and interviewing all those people that you had the privilege to tell their stories, it just remind us, regardless if your family is together for many years or if you have had a mosaic relationship with different families and different people, you get to choose how you're telling the story. Was it a mistake? Was it part of the journey? Was it guidance? I mean, off mic, we had this conversation. For me, it's all guidance. Yes, you chose. There's a disempowerment that comes when you say, and when I say first person, I made a mistake, I messed up. There's ownership, but there's also disempowerment because was God there guiding you or not? Was the Holy Spirit guiding you or not? You see what I'm saying? And then I don't ever doubt that. The moments that I doubt that, the Holy Spirit kicked me gently, sometimes not as gently, to remind me that if you are who we say we are, God's daughter, God's son, there's always guidance. It's always part of the journey. So I love that so much that you were able to bring that up for us. And this is a curiosity question. What chapter was harder to write and why?
I don't know if I can choose just one chapter because the story is woven into all of it. I think the hardest part of in through all of it is being vulnerable. We say in our training as a therapist, oh, we're not supposed to share anything about ourselves. And I'm like, how are we to help say we're humans that we can identify? One of the things that I teach my students is not to do countertransference, meaning that if you're my client, Kenya, I turn my question to your experience for you to be the therapist to tell me what you feel so it answers my question. And so I believe sharing not details, but information about, hey, Kenya, I know what it's like to identify with you, with your mom and things of that nature. And I remember a time to where my mom said this to me and I didn't know how to resonate with that. So coming alongside people, and again, I don't think there was one chapter for me. It was the hardest part was allowing the vulnerability to be there, to have a voice.
Beautiful. So as we read your book, what was the intention behind, Steve? The raw intention. And I'm asking a vulnerable question because you're already generous with your vulnerability throughout every page. What do you want our listeners, our readers, to take from what is your intention behind the pages?
I could go on and we got about 4 or 5 minutes left, but in a synopsis,
yes,
you're not alone.
Oh, thank you for that.
Can change happen? It can. As my dad, again, I love my dad. And I've dedicated the book to my dad because even though we've had differences, I still love him because of what he's taught me. And he says that your mind is like a parachute. It only functions when it's open. And if we can read a book with open-mindedness, we can receive and apply. And so I don't know of any other book that puts vulnerability, puts research of other human beings, and collectively shows a simple way through therapy, sort of say, putting all this together in one book as a help book. I have a chapter in this is take sobriety. I mean, not sobriety. I've never been drunk, so sobriety, that was not the right term. My apology. Take a sabbatical from dating. Learn to heal yourself from your childhood hurt wounds. I call those splinters. Other people call them triggers. So in my book, I use different terminology because, trigger, we're projecting pain and not taking accountability for what we feel hurt. So I call it a splinter. A splinter is that wound that gets stimulated by an action that causes us to feel upset, but we don't know where it's coming from. So it's learning to identify where that splinter is from.
Beautiful.
So that we can heal from our childhood hurt wound. Because if we don't, we carry it into the first marriage. And the first marriage, we carry it into the second marriage. And I'm like, you know what, Steve, what am I doing?
Exactly.
How is it that I'm ending up in all these different, the marriages and divorces and such? I'm like, you know what? I became a therapist. I made
to answer the question.
Huh?
100% to answer that question for yourself.
Yeah.
100%. Well, Steve, with your permission, I don't want to go too far in extending this podcast a little longer, but I do have a very important last question because I know it's a subject that you stand for. You made many Facebook posts about it. You are an advocate for, just disintegrating the system of parental alienation challenge. And so how does the concept of disruptive parental attachment, DPA, helps reframe the challenges of alienation and custody disputes? And this goes so much hard in law for the people that are going through it right now.
That's the thing. It becomes a challenge because when you think about parental alienation, this started back in the 1980s or 90s by an author named Garland. And they try to put it into the DSM. And, when you think about the DSM, they can't define syndrome. And so when you think about the syndrome that's there, it doesn't justify. It focuses on the parent and not the child. And so when you go to court systems, the issue is the fact that they're using parental alienation. So I'm in part of the IRB now, which is a research board through Oklahoma University, doing some more research showing that parental alienation syndrome needs to be off the books.
Exactly.
I termed it to disruptive parental attachment. That's in my book. To show that children's attachment to that parent is hindered. And there's proof. Researchers show that 90% of personality disorders like narcissist, borderline, histrionic, control the narrative of that child to dislike the other parent that's healthy. Research has shown. I often tell some of my clients that I want your child to go and see a certain psychologist to get a testing done. They use a retrospective intelligence test that can actually show the full-scale IQ. And when there's perceptual reasoning or memory or things like that, it has a low average score or below average, indicates possible trauma in that child because they cannot remember. And you think, well, I got to tell my kids 15 times. Okay, are we yelling? Because that's a form of abuse at your child because you're attacking the nervous system of the child that becomes overloaded, stimulated, and they don't know what to do. And so that's the reason why I want to change and put it on the child. And they say, well, what's in the best interest? It's not about the best interest. It's, are we preventing transgenerational trauma?
There we go.
And going to DC and trying to find legislators that will have this backing to be able to have judges and attorneys to go through mandatory CEU, which is continuing education, about how their rulings impact children's lives. Why is it that judges are giving back kids to parents who traumatize them? It just doesn't make sense.
Thank you. From a woman, a servant, a human, that I take stand for myself, for breaking generational trauma, curses, all the things. And I also take a stand to raise healthy leaders for this world. Our children are future of it, period. And the fact that you're creating awareness, what I hear you saying is you're creating awareness, creating education, and raising awareness from the top down. This is what you're creating when you, in the court system, just release and allow this manipulation and trauma bonding experiences to be coded into young minds. Because that's what it is, Steve. I've seen over and over again in my own life and the life of so many that, parents not just bring the DNA of health, like your health history, right? Your health history is in your children's, but also your emotional history, your psychological history. It's in there. And when there's a breakup and a parent is using the children to have their way, they are creating destruction, not just in the family system, but in the world. Right. So in behalf of all women out there, thank you for taking a stand to be a strong masculine voice, to protect us, to show that our voices do matter. And I raise up an invitation here. If you're not following Steve all around the platform, if you're not following Coach So, please do so. Not just our podcast, but we're here for much more impact than just know that we have a book out there, know that Steve has something, that Kenya has something, but we really want and we believe that our voices matter, that we are put here for a reason, that Steve being courageous in his purpose is raising you up to be courageous in your purpose and to decide that you can change, right? And that you don't need to be alone in your change. So
if you wanted to look up my work, keep postings on blogs, I do have my work listed out there. It's you can get to my dissertation through a link. The website is drsteveh.com, just simple, Dr. Steve, and that's drsteveh.com if you want further information. And so, Kenya, thank you for this opportunity to have the roles reversed of you interviewing me on this. It's been a pleasure. So until next time, take care and God bless.
Love you so.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on Coach Soul. As we wrap up, we want to remind our listeners of a few key points. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The content shared here is based on professional opinion but may not apply to everyone's situation. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider before making changes to your mental health care. If you're in a crisis, please seek immediate professional help or contact a crisis hotline. Listening to this podcast does not create a therapist-client relationship. For personal advice, please consult with your licensed mental health professional in your area. Remember, your mental health journey is unique. While we hope this information is helpful, it is crucial to work directly with the qualified personnel for your specific needs. Thank you again for tuning in to Coach Soul, and we'll see you next time.